we can talk about the Joe Schmidt versus Andy Farrell thing a little bit later on in the show, but it certainly feels to me like there's no way that we will be playing the rugby that we are now if Joe Schmidt was still there, and that we needed Andy Farrell. We absolutely needed Andy Farrell. And I don't buy that it was just a linear thing, because if it was just linear, he was just building on immediately what Schmidt had done. Then why did it take a year and a half for everything to click for them? I think that he is his own man, and this is their own thing, and they had to go back to the very start to allow players like Andrew Porter to reach his full potential. We're going to talk about Porter a little bit later on as well, so I don't know.
We didn't know we needed Farrell was the thing at the time, right? Like, we definitely, the current history is not reflecting extremely warmly on Schmidt. They're like, okay, people kind of forget the success that he brought. I mean, look what he did with Leinster, like all this stuff that has happened under the Joe Schmidt era. It's been slightly sort of washed in a slightly different colour, let's say.
Well, I think that the hagiography and the mythology around Joe Schmidt got too high. Like, he came into a Leinster side that had already won a European Cup under Michael Cheika. He came into an Ireland side that had already won a Grand Slam under Declan Kidney and reached new levels with those teams. But he isn't the starter of that story, and he's not the end of that story. Whereas actually, at the time, if you were to read like the stuff, was like, oh, this is absolutely incredible. It's the greatest thing that's ever happened. He's a genius, and he obviously is a coaching genius. But I'm not sure that necessarily he created the environment that the team has now, where they're all able to get better and they all feel like they're, like it was a very small squad. No one ever kind of came in and seemed to get particularly better when they reached the Ireland setup, the way that, like, you can point to several players who were subs at their club team, who, like Gibson Park, for example. Like, the transformation of Gibson Park into one of the best scrum halves in the world. Like, he's not first choice for Leinster. And then they're like, you're going to come in and you're going to join our team and you can do something that we see. Like that, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe someone's going to point out examples where Schmidt was able to do that and pick players. But anyway, look, everybody knows the difference in the style and the approach at this stage. And I don't mean to diminish the career that Schmidt had, but like, we got beaten in a World Cup by Argentina in a quarter-final, and we got beaten by Japan and the All Blacks in another World Cup. And so his record's not that much better than Kidney's. There's an extra couple of championships in there, but it's not like it's a complete outlier. And then Andy Farrell is a kind of step down. It's actually, you'd have to say, we're building. Farrell is now ascending to a higher height, and the big test is the World Cup. If we go out in the group stages in the World Cup, then it's just the same as everything else. So
I find it interesting that Farrell must have been Farrell, the all infamous the mood in the camp jar, the mood in the camp, our old friend, the mood in the camp.
You better explain to people why you hate that.
The mood in the camp is just like, if people in
what is the mood in the camp?
Journalism school 101 needs to be, when you find yourself at a press conference or in some sort of an interview with a sports person, don't ask them how the mood in the camp is. I mean, unless there's been like big reports that the mood in the camp is not good, which it seems like, in a nice segue, that in Schmidt's time it wasn't all that great. But in the Farrell era, it does appear as if, like, he must have been sitting there for the 4 or 5 years under Schmidt going, if I was to get, I must do this differently, right? Like, because there's a different philosophical approach here in terms of the style of play and the mood, our old friend, the mood in the camp.
Has this perhaps made you revisit your hatred of the question, when actually, if they would actually tell you the truth, well, do you know what, we feel a little bit constrained, we feel like we're under pressure the whole time, whereas these lads are like, actually, Andy Farrell knows the name of my kids. Do you know?
Yeah.
Not that Schmidt didn't, but like, he seems to...
The question specifically is like a bland question that always deserves a bland answer, and specifically came up at a press conference with an Ireland player some years ago, where there was an interesting line of questioning about doping in sport, and it was getting very interesting, and one person in the room was not all that interested in the way the question was going and said, whatever about that, how's the mood in the camp? To which
pretty good,
with like a half a vein of journalism in the room, just exhaled and packed up their laptop.
Is your disdain for it because there's so little you can do with that question?
It's a nonsense question.
Well, who's going to tell you the truth?
The mood in the camp.
We're all pissed off at each other.
You're probably hoping for that 1% chance that the body language betrays the words.
But then
not with that question.
And also, as far as I know, you were working in radio at the time, so the body language thing is non-transmissible.
Yeah.
Then I've got nothing for you, because they're not going to say anything.
There's a prophylactic on the body language.
That's feel to me since Saturday particularly that the Joe Schmidt era has been torn up, isn't it? And God, that wasn't that great at all.
I
And
don't-
he really ruined us,
I actually think it's the opposite.
which is crazy.
I think, well, it's not. I mean, the truth is obviously in between, right? The truth is that we underperformed at the key moments, and potentially because of some blind spots that the head coach had.
Yeah.
You'd have to say that the squad, the talent of the squad that went to the World Cup 4 years ago was excellent and should have done better than it did. But we failed to beat a Japan side who were good, but we hadn't done enough work.
It does feel
we hadn't considered them as a potential team that was going to beat us, and that's on the head coach.
Yeah, but it feels that even, as I'm saying, the last couple of days, that because of the World Cup in 2019, that tarnished everything that happened before that. But like, you forget that Schmidt under this, Jacob Stockdale inspired night against New Zealand and the 2018 Six Nations, and he was on a late show and people were saying this is like Joe Schmidt's the best sports coach in Irish sporting history. And here we are 5 years later being like, oh, that was a bit of a damp era, wasn't it? And
But
now
was
we
that-
actually have a proper manager in place.
Was that
That's
correct?
What it feels like.
Was it correct that he was the best at the
that time
time?
it probably was.
No, it wasn't though. Is my point. Like,
Well, he had achieved things with Leinster and Ireland that no other coach mostly was achieving. That was the thing. And like the quality of rugby, we were willing to forgive it was like an anti-Stephen Kenny move. We were like willing to forgive we weren't really overly aware, but the quality of the play was obviously not particularly good. But I think, like in terms of, we talk about the sort of changing of a narrative of a head coach like that. So you have all the little bits of stories that start to come out, like, so you remember the Scotland thing from, what year was that, 2017, whatever year it was, when we went over there and the bus got a little bit delayed going to the stadium and everybody was up in arms about it. And then you had, like, was it Jack Conan out after the Scotland game this year, and we were saying, if no matter what happens, if we have to get off the bus just before the whistle goes, then we'll be prepared to do that. So you've that helps feed a changing narrative of, that was fine, that was grand, and that was of its time.
Yeah.
But I mean, this stuff now, this is where it's at.
yeah, and so you think that's managed or not true? Because it feels to me like that.
I think it's totally true.
And I think that's the point here, is that like it was an incorrect analysis of the point that he's the greatest coach of all time. I'm not diminishing he did well, but certainly we can retrospectively go, there were issues there.
Yeah, but
like the level of control that he sought and brought into the team worked to a point, but then stopped working, and that's not like post fact. That's not just post fact rationalisation. That's like, we can diagnose that now, and what we're seeing is, we hope. And here's the thing: this team might go out in the quarterfinals, but if they die with their boots on in a game where they've actually lived up to their potential and the opposition is world class, that's completely different from going out against New Zealand the last time, where it was over by 20 minutes in. And we shouldn't even have been in that game because we should have beaten Japan in the first place and taken the alternative route to the semi-final.
It could totally go like belly up for us in France. There's no question about it. And I mean, it is an interesting point. Will we at that point go, well, we had the Grand Slam and things are developing, and we were very unlucky because some of the key players got injured, and even with the extended squad and the development we had this year,
we've got the worst draw we've ever had
against us. So yeah, exactly. So there's a ready-made narrative, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If things go to pot.
Yeah,
but I mean, I'd still need to take to the bed for.
I would disagree with you, Colin. I think that there's been a lot of people saying that this is Joe Schmidt's team and Andy Farrell just tweaked a few little things, and that's what I've basically taken from the coverage that I've seen, and I think that's wrong. I think that actually there's a clear delineation and demarcation rather between what we're doing now and what we did then, and I see much more room for growth in this team than I did at that stage. Anyway,
yeah, well, I feel a lot of the coverage has been that. Joe Schmidt was really a control freak, and it didn't help the individualism of any players or any creativity, and a bit like Pep Guardiola at his worst with Manchester City. And when Andy Farrell is, he allows players to be himself. So the Mac Hansen example, would Schmidt have allowed Hansen back on media duty after his comments about England? Who knows? Maybe. That's probably overblown as well in itself. But there is a kind of revisionism, I feel, about Schmidt during this Six Nations. I would say the exact opposite to you, Ger, that it feels like if you didn't watch Schmidt's Ireland, you would say, who was this schmuck almost, because of what they did at the World Cup.
And are you saying the analysis that you started that bit there is wrong?
What do you mean?
You said you used the word control freak. Do you think that's wrong?
Yeah, because I think
but is it
you
not
have
exactly
to go back to 2018 and what he achieved with that side. And like Jerry Thornley made the point last night on Monday Night Rugby, and you could disagree with this, that Schmidt essentially taught Ireland how to win. I think Thornley was quoting. And there, to an extent, that was true. because the New Zealand
We not win a
victory-
Grand Slam. Did they imagine Ronan O'Gara kicking a drop goal to win a Grand Slam? Like a Grand Slam, which happened before. Do you know what I mean? Like this is like history starting in 1992 for football. It didn't. Like it's a continuum.
But I think you have to separate the results, which were exceptional, mostly, from the style of play and the way we found our way playing that style of play. Because there was definitely, I mean, there was phraseology around the camp that was used about like how stringent a tight a camp he was running.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like particularly, I don't, is this important? But it didn't feel like it was a particularly fun place to be for the players. And
But that's
the knot in the pit of your stomach driving down Carton House, that story's come out in recent weeks. Like I guess I don't know what you're saying, Colin.
I don't know. People remember how you made them feel, and it feels like with the Andy Farrell era that everyone's having a much better time. So look, I'll put it to you like this: say the World Cup's a disaster again, and it's another quarter-final exit. Well, I wonder what the reaction is going to be to Farrell.
Look, and there'll be a massive backlash. There will be a massive backlash. But are you saying you don't think he was a control freak?
I don't think he was a control freak in terms of a negative impact for the vast majority of his squad, his time with Ireland, because you look at the success just before that World Cup, or just before the 2019 Six Nations, that first game against England in Dublin, where England came to town and won by 13 points. I think up to that point, everything that Schmidt was putting in place was a structure that was a winning formula. And for me, the interesting change in the analysis of it was he was probably doing the exact same thing, and then that turned into a negative. And it was because of the results. So the narrative completely changed as a result because of the results. And it was introspection about, maybe the fact that he doesn't allow his players to think creatively is actually a negative. Even though what the previous examples we've seen is that formula worked brilliantly for this Irish side, and I think that's slightly unfair.
It didn't work brilliantly though. It worked to a certain point and then stopped working.
Well, what are you saying in the peak of the success?
But the peak of the success was he didn't build enough depth ahead of the World Cup, where we end up being beaten by Argentina. I've definitely heard people who know way more about rugby than me say Argentina were going to win that game anyway because they're attacking width outside. I know Brian O'Driscoll said that Payne was injured, and so therefore the defence out wide would have been better if he'd been playing. I'd love if AI could play that game where we have our full team and we model it out, and a million times we play the game, we see how many times that Argentina team win that game, and who knows what would have happened after that. But there was no strength and depth that they hadn't been, and then they spent the next couple of years trying to build some strength and depth, and then at the last minutes they're like, okay, we don't have any, and Joey Carberry plays through injury and then is unavailable for the game against Japan. And the other thing is that when a camp is as tight as that one was, remember the teams wouldn't be released to the press. There was an investigation at one stage because a team had got out. I don't know if somebody had told their mum that they were in the team, and the mum had told somebody, and then all of a sudden this is a massive. There was an incident with a room key card that became a big deal because somebody had been found. One had been found.
Had lost their key, yeah.
And it was like a bad attention to detail. Like all of the stories, this isn't post fact. This you were hearing these stories. You're talking about the parody that was going around about the camp,
But I think so. I don't think it's in question that there was a controlled environment. But I think Schmidt was doing that very deliberately. He didn't wander into that. It wasn't against his personality. This was absolutely by design. He went in and he looked at the sum of his parts and he thought, this is the way I need to play it. And I mean, even listening to it might have been Donal Lennon on the TV last night talking about how Andy Farrell devolves the power base even within his own team in terms of Mike Catt and Simon Easterby and Paul O'Connell, that he's saying to them on a Monday, here, all this went wrong at the weekend, what are you going to do about it? Whereas I don't think, and the evidence nearly come full circle to the point I made earlier on about Farrell, the evidence of what was going on previously wasn't that. It was like a mad genius in the tower.
Exactly. I sat up all night coming up with these 3 plays. If we do these 3 plays, we're going to win the game. And they do those 3 plays and they do win the game. But then eventually, over a period of time, that wears off.